You know the feeling. You're supposed to be watching a movie, supposed to be relaxing, supposed to be completely off the clock. But there's a dish in the sink, there's a pillow slightly out of place on the couch, there's a cup that someone left on the coffee table instead of a coaster, and you can't do it. You literally cannot enjoy yourself until it's fixed. This isn't just a quirk, and it's not just being tidy. There is serious psychology happening inside the brains of people who cannot fully relax unless their environment is clean. And understanding it changes everything. Let's start with the brain itself, because this is where it gets fascinating. When people who have high environmental sensitivity walk into a messy room, their brains do something measurable. Cortisol levels rise. Cortisol is your stress hormone, the same chemical that spikes when you're in danger, when you're under pressure, when something is wrong. For most people, clutter is just background noise. For others, it's a full volume alarm signal, and they can't turn it down until the source of the alarm is removed. Researchers at UCLA actually studied this. They found that women who described their homes as cluttered or unfinished had consistently higher cortisol levels throughout the day compared to women who described their homes as restful and restorative. The clutter wasn't just an aesthetic issue, it was a physiological one. Their nervous systems were treating the mess like a threat. And when your nervous system thinks there's a threat, relaxation isn't an option. That's not weakness, that's biology. But here's where it gets deeper, because not everyone has this response. So what separates the people who can leave dishes in the sink without a second thought from the people who feel a genuine sense of dread until those dishes are done? A huge part of it comes down to a trait psychologists call anxiety sensitivity. People with high anxiety sensitivity don't just experience stress, they experience it more intensely, and they're more attuned to the signals that trigger it. Visual disorder, unfinished tasks, things out of place, these are all signals. And for someone with high anxiety sensitivity, those signals are louder, more urgent, harder to ignore. This often overlaps with something called conscientiousness, one of the big 5 personality traits. Highly conscientious people are organized, detail-oriented, and deeply uncomfortable when their environment doesn't match their internal sense of order. Their brains are essentially wired to notice discrepancies between how things are and how they should be. For low conscientiousness people, there is no should be. Clutter just exists. For high conscientiousness people, clutter is a problem waiting to be solved, and it actively competes for mental bandwidth until it's addressed. And that phrase, mental bandwidth, is exactly right. There's a concept in cognitive psychology called attentional residue. When there's an unfinished task in your environment, your brain keeps part of its attention on it even when you're trying to focus on something else. You're watching TV, but your brain has a background process running on the laundry pile. You're trying to read, but something keeps pulling your attention to the counter that needs wiping. The environment is essentially leaking into your mind. For people who struggle to relax until things are clean, this effect is turned up to maximum volume. Cleaning isn't procrastination, it's the only way to actually close the tabs. Now here's the part that most people don't talk about. For many of these people, the need to clean before relaxing isn't just about cleanliness, it's about control. And that's where the psychology gets really interesting. Life is unpredictable, relationships are complicated, work is stressful, the future is uncertain, but a clean kitchen that you can control, a perfectly made bed that you can control. When anxiety is high and the external world feels chaotic, imposing order on a physical space becomes a way of managing internal emotional overwhelm. The cleaning isn't really about the mess, it's about reclaiming a sense of agency. Psychologists have noticed this pattern repeatedly. People going through difficult periods in their lives, breakups, job stress, grief, often report compulsive cleaning behaviors. The act of cleaning becomes a ritual of control in a world that feels out of control. And it works, at least temporarily. After cleaning, the brain genuinely does feel calmer. The cortisol drops, the background alarm quiets. The problem is that the relief doesn't last because the actual source of the anxiety isn't the dishes. It never was. This is where the line gets blurry between a coping mechanism and something that starts to interfere with life. There's a huge difference between someone who likes a clean home and feels genuinely more comfortable in organized spaces, and someone who can't sit down for 5 minutes without scanning for disorder, who snaps at family members for leaving things out, who cancels plans because the house isn't perfect, who feels physically uncomfortable in their own body if the environment isn't exactly right. One is a personality trait. The other is anxiety that has latched onto cleanliness as its outlet. For people on that more intense end, cleaning rituals can start to look a lot like compulsive behavior. The relief from cleaning is real, but it requires increasingly high standards to produce the same calm. What used to be a tidy kitchen now requires organizing the cupboards. What used to be a made bed now requires perfectly fluffed pillows and a specific arrangement of throw cushions. The goalposts keep moving because the underlying anxiety is the thing that needs addressing, and cleaning can only ever be a temporary fix. There's also something worth naming about how this plays out in relationships. People who can't relax in a mess often live with people who can, and that gap creates real friction. The clean needs partner experiences the mess as genuinely stressful. The easygoing partner feels judged, controlled, or like they can never do enough. Neither person is wrong. They're just running completely different operating systems. One person's neutral is another person's emergency. Understanding that this is a neurological and psychological difference, not a moral failing on either side, is actually the first step toward navigating it without resentment. So what do you do if you recognize yourself in this? If you're someone who has spent years unable to sit down until the house is spotless, the most important question to ask isn't how do I clean more efficiently? It's what am I trying to feel when the cleaning is done? Because if the answer is safe, calm, in control, good enough, then those are emotional needs that deserve to be addressed directly, not just managed through a mop. Therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral approaches, can help rewire the way the brain responds to environmental disorder. It doesn't mean learning to live in chaos. It means learning that your worth and your calm don't have to depend on whether the counter is wiped down. And if you just genuinely love a clean space, if it brings you joy and comfort, and you function better in an organized environment, then lean into that completely. Not everyone who needs a clean space is anxious. Some people simply thrive in order, and that is a completely legitimate way to live. The psychology of people who can't relax until everything is clean is really the psychology of people who feel things deeply, who are wired to notice, who carry more than they show, and who have found one very specific way to quiet the noise inside. Understanding why is the beginning of choosing how.